All right. Hello, business writing students. Welcome to almost the end of the quarter. We're in the last couple weeks here. And with these last few weeks, we are going to be bringing everything together into what is the job application packet assignment. Now, in order to do that, I want to kind of return to the beginning of the quarter and talk about all of the things that we've studied, all of the things that we've been thinking about, uh, and all of the things that we can apply going forward. So we'll be bringing together all of our lessons, emails, resumes, and cover letters being the most important part. But underlying that are things like choosing a job and grammar mechanics and things like that. Now, as a quick aside, I'll say that I suspect most of you will use the same job that you selected earlier in the quarter, and you're more than welcome to do that. There are some reasons that you might choose a different job in this case. One might be that you were overqualified or underqualified for the job that you chose. Another might be that you simply want the additional practice of starting over again, tailoring your resume, tailoring your cover letter, because it's very common within the practice of looking for a job that you might need to do this 5, 6, 7, 8, a dozen times or more in order to find that job that you want. And over a career, it might be even more than that. I have no idea how many times I've rewritten cover letters, emails, resumes, and things like that that pertain to looking for a job. So as we kind of think about the component parts that we've looked at this quarter, we'll look at these three in this presentation. So, excuse me, a couple reminders of how these things work together, because I think that very rarely is writing in the business world done in isolation. As we saw earlier this quarter with the email assignment, the initial email assignment, you are writing an email to a colleague, but there was some other writing that would have been entailed in that process. One part was the copywriting that needed to be done for the advertisements. There might have been other emails. And even from the email that you sent, you might need to respond. So very rarely is it just a sort of one writing task in complete isolation. Now, again, when we think about an email, the purpose is to convey a small amount of information clearly and effectively, again, taking into account whether or not an email is the best vehicle for that message. Is it better to send an email than it is to send a message in Microsoft Teams or a text message or a phone call or scheduling a meeting? The purpose of the resume is to highlight relevant experience and education, right? Distilling down your career, as it were, whatever it is. It depends on the job, if it's part of your career, if it's just a job that you're looking for, but hitting the highlights. And then the cover letter is that expansion of the resume where we're explaining how your experience best suits the job at hand. Now, in the final job application packet, we'll be looking at all of those things together and bringing them into a sort of layered approach to things. So writing an email inquiry for a job and then including a tailored resume and a tailored cover letter. And we'll talk about that more in future video lectures. So some things to remember. Number one, business writing is clear and effective. It's concise. It avoids wordiness. It uses an appropriate tone to the task. Again, keeping in mind the fact that the audience is busy. They're focused on specifics. They might simply be skimming, especially if it is a hiring manager or an HR person. And that's sort of not to mention the various computer systems that might be scanning your email for keywords. And then the last thing is to remember that business writing acknowledges the task and the purpose. There should be a clear, immediate goal or actionable item that we need to address. Okay, so let's continue on. I'm trying to keep this video under 10 minutes. So I want to talk a little bit about grammar, right? Grammar and mechanics. And although I'm an English instructor and also teach business writing, grammar is a very complex system within the English language, and going into the details, into the weeds on diagramming sentences is probably unnecessary. You can write well without knowing what a gerund is or what the past participle is. If you do, great, but it's not essential to know what those things are in order to do them. So if we look at kind of grammar mechanics, especially within a professional setting, we want to make sure that we're using appropriate grammar. Something like Grammarly is great for catching a lot of small things, missing comma or incorrect verb tense or something like that. We want to make sure that we're using the active tense rather than the passive tense. So if you remember, the active tense is Joe kicked the ball. The passive tense is the ball was kicked by Joe. And that active tense is often shorter and more immediate. Now, there's a whole other discussion we could have about when one should use the passive tense, but I think that's beyond the scope of this particular quarter. Is part of that, we want to maintain that formal and professional tone. Again, we're avoiding cliches, slang, unnecessary jargon, and it is dependent. So if we are applying, say, for a job that everybody knows within that field what BP stands for, then we probably don't need to explain it. But I use that BP specifically because it changes depending on your career or your field. For example, in the healthcare industry, BP would mean blood pressure, most likely. If it were the business world, it might mean British Petroleum. If it is sports, in particular baseball, it might mean batting practice. So again, we want to make sure that any acronyms or any jargon are things that are very clear to everybody involved. Number 4, we want to avoid unnecessary adverbs. So things like really, very, or incredibly. I just find that they tend to be very weak words. I just use very in my own example. But they don't add a lot and they seem to take up space. So cutting those things out will help you get to the point more quickly and effectively. Number 5, make sure you're focusing on specifics. So that's both word choice and details. If you're including a date, make sure that you include the exact date. If there's a specific time or location, those things as well. And then also make sure that you're checking things visually on your own and not simply relying on something like a grammar checker like Grammarly, because they do still make mistakes. Sometimes it's the wrong word. I've seen Grammarly weirdly change tenses and even change the meaning of sentences. So be very, very careful about that. Now, some reminders when it comes to emails, and then we'll be pretty close to wrapping up this particular video. So email reminders, as we go into an email, I mentioned a minute ago, but is an email the best vehicle of communication? I will tell you right at the outset, for the job application packet, it absolutely is, because that's part of the design. But think about, what is the purpose of the email? If you're inquiring about a job, the purpose is kind of a first impression, although you might also be asking for other details or other information if it's not clear from the job posting. Who's the audience? Now, you may not know specifically who the audience is if it is a hiring manager or HR and there's no specific name attached to it. However, that person is still a representative of the business, and so we want to speak to them in that particular tone and with that necessary respect. What do you want the audience to know, do, or believe in a job inquiry email? You want them to know that you're qualified, that you're serious, and that you are interested. Use the correct greeting for the audience. Use short, concise paragraphs, maybe with bullet points. Again, we want to hover around that 100-word mark. It is dependent. If you go a little bit over, a little bit under, that's fine. So don't feel like it's a clear limit. You want to contain a specific ask or action. If it's a job inquiry, that might be, please contact me if you have any other questions, or if you would like my references, please let me know. Number 9, you're going to contain a sign-off with your contact information. And then if you're including attachments, make sure that you reference them in your email. Now, for a job application email, you're probably going to tell the recipient that you have attached your resume and your cover letter for their review. It is best, I find, to also say what file format that is. If it's Google Doc, probably not the best, but a Word document or a PDF. I often will default to a PDF in these situations. Okay, a little bit more, almost there. Resume reminders. So remember, and we've done this relatively recently, so hopefully it's fresh in your head. Your resume is your education and experience. You're avoiding any unnecessary graphics or visual distraction. Um, Number three is one that I noticed on quite a few of the resumes as I was grading them. Make sure your most recent experience is first. So, whatever is your most recent job should be at the top, and then we go back in time as we go down the page. Use short bulleted lists that focus on accomplishments, again, things that they wouldn't intuit based on the job itself. So if you were a server in a restaurant, you don't need to say that you waited on tables because that would be part of the assumption. Make sure that you include your contact info. All of you did that. You don't necessarily have to include your street address. Sometimes just a city and state is fine. Include references if asked. And if you want to default to including references, use whatever they recommend. Usually it's 2 or 3. And then include that objectives or summary statement at the beginning. I really think that that's key, especially since it's the prime real estate right at the top. Okay, last thing before we close out this particular video is the obvious one, and that is to talk about cover letters. So make sure that you're tailoring the cover letter to the job at hand. Don't simply rehash your resume, right? And this is a place where we can expand on what was in the resume and really give more detail, more information. Make sure you're using complete sentences and an appropriate tone, just like you would with your email and your resume. Spelling grammar check. Make sure you've addressed the right recipient. Make sure if it's a specific person that you've spelled their name correctly. You'd be surprised at how many times I get emails from students who misspell my name. It's surprising to me because it's relatively short last name, but there you go. Focus on how your experience matches the specific job, even if that's an abstract or indirect connection, right? So if it's, I'm applying for a job in nursing, but I have worked as a recipient, or not a recipient, a receptionist in a busy office, there's still that component of dealing with people that's important to highlight. And then lastly, of course, be enthusiastic and make sure that you're showing your personality. The email inquiry and the cover letter are the place where you can best show them who you are, and that helps them understand, hey, I want to work with this person. They seem upbeat, they seem enthusiastic, they seem to have everything together. They paid attention to detail, and this is the type of person that we want working for our company. Okay, so there you go. Over 10 minutes, about 13 minutes, but we got close. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all in the future.